So like I said before, we're just going to go over some of the AP biology details. So first, I just want to say definitely follow us on like Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Doing this, it'll just keep you guys more informed with what Fiveable is doing, because there's actually a lot of really good streams that are coming out recently. So it's good to always check those out. And you don't know, they might help you with other classes as well. So those are good to check out. And yeah, you just learn a little bit more from what our company is doing and how it can help. And then so today we're going to do an over of the new AP biology exam. So I'm going to be telling you what exactly the components are, how they're weighted, what's included in them, and then I'm going to tell you guys about some of the changes that happened from last year's exam. So how it's different from last year and how that kind of changes the way you need to prepare. And then we're going to do a few FRQs from Unit 1 just to help prepare. So the AP exam this year is May 11th, 2020 at 8 a.m. And the test is 3 hours long. 3 hours long, and there's 2 parts. The first part is multiple choice, and in the multiple choice questions, there's 60 questions in 1.5 hours, and this is half the entire test. And so with multiple choice, some of the questions have, a majority of the questions actually have paragraphs or diagrams before the question, and they're pretty long. So with the time constraints, they can seem really daunting because you only have about 90 seconds for each question. So the best thing I'm going to say with those is to actually just skim it once, or read the question first, and then skim through the paragraphs, because a majority of the time, not every single detail in that paragraph is going to actually be useful, and sometimes you can even answer those questions without even having to read the paragraph. So I would say just go through the questions for those diagrams or pictures, see what they're asking for, and then you guys can decide or like pick out what you need from those diagrams and those paragraphs. For free response questions, response questions are also 6 questions. So within that, there's going to be a few longer FRQs and a few short answer ones. And to do all 6 questions, you guys have, again, 90 minutes, and they're 50% of the score. Now, FRQs are actually kind of the scariest part of the exam, because just with taking the class, you'll be getting used to just doing the multiple choice, knowing how to answer those, and figuring out your timing for that. But with the FRQ, it's a little more difficult because they're very intimidating. Like, the questions seem a lot more complex than they actually are. Like, while we were preparing for our AP exam, our teacher gave us like a full FRQ section and gave us like 15 minutes to go over and just plan ideas. And that was actually really scary. And it was like the first time you look at the huge test and you aren't completely confident in your answers. And then once you actually went over with us, you understand that your content, like, you know all the content, and all you need are very, very simple answers to those. And so we're kind of going to do a smaller version of that when we go over Unit 1 FRQs. So that's the main part of the exam. And then, so these are some of the major changes that have happened over the last few years. So numeric written questions are basically questions that used to be at the end of the multiple choice section, and there used to be, I believe, 6 of them. And these were basically just calculations, mathematical calculations that you could do with a 4-function calculator, and you guys can still have that calculator with you guys on the actual exam. And so those were at the end of the multiple choice section, and they were part of that 1.5 hours. And they were just the calculation portions, like some of the equations like Hardy-Weinberg, which you guys will see in evolution, or a lot of genetics questions can pop up on there. And so those were completely removed from the exam this year. So there's not going to be any numeric writtens at all. but still make sure that you guys are going over your mathematical equations, any like statistical stuff that you guys learn in class, because that's actually going to still be in the multiple choice questions. Like they can always be anywhere, and sometimes they're even in the FRQs. And then FRQ questions, like I said, there's 2 less, and so it's a lot better for you guys to pace yourself out now, because now instead of spending a lot of time or spending very short amounts of times on FRQs, you guys have a little bit more thinking space, which actually makes it easier for you guys to make sure that you're getting everything done. And then also the way the class is formatted has changes. So in previous AP biology units, or the curriculum, they had the 4 big ideas. And under those 4 big ideas, they had a lot of other smaller topics that would fit in. So like cell communication, genetics, everything. Instead of them being in their own separate units, they were under 4 big ideas. And so that changed in the past year, where now they're doing only 8 units. So they're split into subjects. So ecology is one of them, cell cycles, cells, all of that stuff. So right after this slide, we're about to start FRQ examples. So if you guys have any questions, pop them up and I can answer them for a few minutes before we move on. Okay, well, there's no questions, I guess, so we'll move on. So for each FRQ, I'm going to give you guys approximately like 5-ish, 6-ish minutes to just go over it and review it in your head and just plan out ideas. So if you guys want to grab a paper, you guys can do that. And then I'll go over it and tell you like what the correct answers were and how you should be answering them. So I'll start with about 5-ish minutes on that, so you guys can just look over and kind of brainstorm. So right now we can go over the FRQ. And so the FRQ, the properties of water dictate many chemical interactions. Water is cohesive. Define cohesion and explain the chemical interactions and properties that make water cohesive. So, sorry. Basically, the water, what cohesion means is that it's the way that water molecules adhere to each other and they have strong bonds between each other. And so the way they have this is between hydrogen bonds. And so the hydrogen from one water molecule and the oxygens of another form a weak bond to connect the two. And so cohesion can be seen with like lakes. Obviously, you don't see just like separate molecules of water. They bond together to show cohesion. And B. So the characteristics of water are of central importance to the arrangement of the cell membrane. Describe and discuss how it is that water exerts this effect. So I'm sure many of you may not have gotten to cells unit yet in your classes. So it's all right if you guys aren't sure about how to answer this one, but the way the plasma membrane or the cell membrane works is it is made up of phospholipids. And the structure of phospholipids is that they have a phosphate head that is okay to interact with water. So it's like okay with bonding with water, and they call that hydrophilic when a molecule is okay with water. And then with that head, it has 2 lipid tails, and those tails are basically hydrophobic, which means that they don't like water. And so the cell membrane is 2 layers, a bilayer of these phospholipids. So what happens is since there's a lot of water within the cell and outside of the cell of any organism technically, the phospholipids will arrange themselves in a way where all the tails are facing the inside and don't have to connect or touch water, and all the heads will arrange on the outside of the layers. So it'll be like two lines of phosphate heads, and in that center will be all the tails that are hydrophilic. And we can go back and answer that question. It's, do you think that there is a possibility of that the difficulty of FRQs will increase this year since there are less questions? So that's always a possibility since this is the first year that they're having this exam. We're not exactly sure how they're going to be structured, but since you guys are in the AP class, you can always use AP Classroom, and they have their progress checks like the FRQs on there. So you can get a general idea of how they're going to be. And I'm not sure how, I don't think they will be increasingly difficult, like way more difficult than the stuff we saw last year, just because I think they did this to give students more time so that students can score better too. So I'm not sure. So my answer is basically I'm not 100% sure, but from what I think, I don't think it'll be significantly harder than other FRQs. And also keep in mind that these FRQs are overall just slightly simpler than what you'll see on the AP exam. These half-cut came on actual AP exams. But the way AP exams FRQs too is they combine topics from 10 different units, or not 10, that's an exaggeration, sorry, but a few different units and combine them together, so it's very application-based, which is what makes it scary. But you guys just need to know that you guys are going to know the content by the exam, and that if you're watching these live streams and keeping up with our stuff, that you'll have everything you need to know to be successful on the exam. And so just, I would just say these should help you guys with the format of FRQs. And then over time, as you guys learn more of the content, it'll help to make some of the more difficult FRQs make more sense. So I hope that helps. Okay, so we can move on to the next FRQ. And this one is going to be about water again. It'll be a little different. It's more comprehensive of all the water stuff. So I'll give you guys again 5 minutes to just brainstorm, come up with a few different possible ideas, and then we'll discuss again. Okay, so we can start going over this FRQ if you guys are ready. And if I'm ever moving to stop, just pop it on the chat and I'll slow down. These are obviously, like, FRQs are new, so if they're they take some time, that's understandable. So the unique properties of water make life possible on Earth. Select 3 properties of water, and for each property of water, identify and define the property and explain it in terms of the physical and chemical nature of water. So first we're going to start with that. And I'm just going to do an overview of each water property and obviously the chemical properties that go along with it. And so the first one is cohesion. So like I said before, that's when water molecules bond together. And the way they do this is through hydrogen bonding. So from hydrogen from one of the atoms molecules bonds to an oxygen from another water molecule and make a hydrogen bond. And just to make sure, if you guys don't know what a hydrogen bond is, it's basically when a hydrogen bonds with another very electronegative molecule that's currently bonded to another hydrogen. So it's when a hydrogen is bonded to a completely electronegative, or a very electronegative atom or element, and then hydrogen bonds with that. So hydrogen bonding with the 2 already bonded molecules, that's the hydrogen bond. And so adhesion is then when water sticks to other surfaces. And so one way you can see this is through a paper towel. That's a very common experiment that people do. And so these are just with regular bonds. And what happens is when you put a paper towel in water, you can see the water climb up the paper. And what you see with that is the water bonds are, or the water is bonding to that paper, and that's adhesion overall. Another example of this is capillary action. So that's when water moves up tubes through adhesion. And so one way we see this is in plants. You guys probably haven't covered this content yet, so I'm just going to briefly mention it, and hopefully you guys understand. So it's when you guys can see capillary action is when water travels up plants through xylem and phloem tubes to get to the leaves, basically. And another final example of adhesion that we can talk about is in test tubes or other scientific equipment. When you measure a liquid out in like a graduated cylinder, you see that there's a curve at the very top. So some of the water slightly rises and there's a dip at the very top. And that dip is caused because the water bonds to the side. And then high specific heat. So the way that works is because of these hydrogen bonds, water needs a very high temperature to get it to boil or vaporize, stuff like that. And so the reason this happens is because of the hydrogen bonds. So a common experiment is done like in AP Bio classes, like with labs, where you put a drop of alcohol and a drop of water on a piece of like plastic or something, and you wait to see which evaporates first. And you'll see that the alcohol actually dries up a lot faster because it doesn't have such a high specific heat because it doesn't have the hydrogen bonds. And another property of water is solvents. It's a universal solvent, which just means that compared to all the other solvents in our planet, water is the most universal because it can dissolve polar molecules and ions, which is something a lot of other solvents can't do. And so these are just some of the properties. There's more. Actually, I'll just talk about it. The last one. So one is that ice is less dense than the liquid form water. The reason this is like that is because when when water is freezing, the hydrogen bonds cause these ice crystals to push outwards. So it kind of expands the entire molecule outwards, which creates obviously a larger surface area or a larger volume of ice, but it's also less dense. And this is really, actually I'll discuss that in the next part because that's kind of what the next question is geared towards. And so B, for each property, describe one example of how the property affects the functioning of living organisms. So we can do one or two of those. And with surface tension, with high specific heat or evaporative cooling, the way that works is it helps organisms because it helps with thermoregulation. So basically, when water is on the surface of your skin and it evaporates because of that high specific heat, it leaves a cooler surface behind and just helps with regulating temperature. And for capillary action, that has to do with adhesion. When I talked about the phloem and xylem in a plant, when capillary action is used to get the water from the roots all the way to the leaves, because the leaves are going to use it in like photosynthesis and everything like that. And then one last one we can talk about is ice being less dense than water. And this is very important in lakes and stuff because when if ice was more dense than water, what would happen is once the top freezes, the ice would sink to the bottom and the bottom continue to freeze and sink to the bottom. And so what would happen with this is you would have an entire frozen lake, which would kill off basically any living organisms in that lake. What happens when ice is less dense than water is that top layer freezes over, but it floats on top of the water. So underneath, all the living organisms can still survive fine. And then we're going to go to the next FRQ. This one's on protein structure, so I'll also give you guys about 5-ish minutes to answer this, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so with this FRQ example, it gives us 4 diagrams of some amino acids that are in a protein chain with a few other amino acids. So A is asking us which of the amino acids could form a hydrogen bond with another amino acid in the chain to stabilize the secondary structure of a protein. And so here we see serine and cytosine, asparagine, and phenylalanine. Sorry. And so the important thing to notice here with the structure, or with secondary structure, tertiary structure, is the R groups. So the R groups is a part of the amino acid that's different for every single one, and it gives the protein the characteristics it usually has. And these R groups, whatever the molecules are in those R groups, are also what decide the structure because they bond with different things. So A is asking for which of the amino acids could form a hydrogen bond with another amino acid in the chain to stabilize secondary structure. I read that question twice, I'm sorry. And so the answer for that one would be both serine and asparagine. And the reason that is there is because in both of them, so in serine you see that there's an oxygen and hydrogen bond. So to notice, to see when there'll be a hydrogen bond between 2 atoms, you basically look for hydrogen bonded with nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine. So the way to remember it, the way I remember it, is I just think of NOF, and it's just a small little acronym or sound I can keep in my brain to help memorize it. So in serine, we see that there's a hydrogen and oxygen bonded together. So we know that could have hydrogen bonds with other amino acids potentially. And then in asparagine, we see that there's the nitrogen bonded with hydrogen. So we also know that that one could potentially bond with other molecules. B is asking which of the amino acids could form disulfide bonds with another amino acid in the chain to stabilize the tertiary structure of the protein. And so disulfide bridges are basically when amino acids that contain sulfur bond with other amino acids that contain sulfur, and they just create long bridges that help stabilize the structure. And so in these, we could see that with cytosine. And we see that with cytosine is because in the R group, CH2SH, you see that there's a sulfur atom, and so that could potentially create a disulfide bridge. The last question is, which of the amino acids could participate in hydrophobic interactions with another amino acid in the chain to stabilize the tertiary structure of the protein? And so the last amino acid is obviously the answer, phenylalanine. And to explain that, in the R group, you see that there is a bonded carbon, or for like a fused carbon. And so when you see that, you know that when you see that type of diagram, your first instinct is to see that as a steroid. So steroids are a lipid, which are hydrophobic molecules. So now that you see that there is part of a steroid in the R group, you know that the entire molecule will be hydrophobic. So we know it's going to cause the hydrophobic interactions with another amino acid. And so we can also move on past this. The next slide. So there's some things, just pre-warning, there's some things on there that you guys might not have learned about before. So I'm going to give you guys only about 2 to 3 minutes to go over this and brainstorm before I go over it. And this is just a good example to see how they're going to incorporate units together. And this is probably something that you'll more likely see on the actual exam. So I'll give you about 3-ish minutes there. Okay, so if you guys are ready, I can start going over this one. So water is important for all living organisms. The functions of water are directly related to its physical properties. Describe how the properties of water contribute to the following: transpiration, thermoregulation, endotherms, and plasma membrane structure. So transpiration is when it's the movement of water from the roots of a plant to the leaves where it can be used in photosynthesis. And so in this, capillary action is used to pull water up through the xylem and phloem, and it goes to the leaves and it can be used there. So I know some of this terminology may not make sense completely yet, but I just wanted to go over this. So hopefully you're understanding, and if you don't, just pop any questions in the chat and I'll make sure you guys get that. So transpiration, it relies on capillary action and adhesion, high specific heat as well. So it relies on those properties of waters, and it contributes to transpiration because it helps pull water up from the roots and send it to the leaf, so it helps with water movement. Thermoregulation and endotherms. So endotherms are warm-blooded animals, and so the way this works is, so water, an example of this in humans is when we sweat. Water comes to the surface of our skin, and so the high specific heat, basically what happens with that is when it evaporates from our skin, it carries away heat with us, leading to a cooler surface, which just helps bring the temperature in endoderms down slightly, and it keeps our body cool and at the temperature that it needs to be in. And then finally, plasma membrane structure, like I discussed before, is reliant on water and the hydrophilic and hydrophobic nature, because the phosphate heads, which are polar, are going to stay on the outside of the cell, and the inside layer of the cell, they're going to line those because cells and the environment contain a lot of water. And then the tails that are hydrophobic will stay on the inside, and so they completely avoid water. So that's just an overview of that FRQ. And I hope this helps you guys just understand how you want to be studying for the exam over time. And I also hope that it just helped you understand how to approach FRQs, because to me and a lot of other students, that was definitely the most daunting part of the entire AP exam process. So thanks for coming, and hopefully you guys come to or attend any of the other live streams. Bye.